Okay, we should be set.
Okay, we'll call to order meeting of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board for the City of Moab at 2:01 p.m. on Wednesday, July 14th. And we'll begin, maybe for the last time, with the written determination to conduct electronic meetings. Whereas pursuant to Moab Municipal Code, I am the presiding officer at all meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board, whereas Utah Code annotated 524101, the Open and Public Meetings Act governs the conduct of meetings of the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board, whereas the Utah Open and Public Meetings Act amendments provide that a public body may convene and conduct an electronic meeting without an anchor location if the chair of the public body, A, makes a written determination that conducting the meeting with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. B, states in the written determination described in subsection 4A the facts upon which the determination is based. Whereas in the previous written determination that I made from August through June 2021, let's just say that I stated the facts regarding COVID-19 and transmission, and I incorporate those prior written determinations here. Whereas the state of Utah remains under a state of public health emergency, Grand County is in a moderate level of transmission, and the City of Moab board meetings do require attendance by individuals at higher risk of severe illness from COVID-19. And as of February 19, 2021, the CDC still indicates that the lowest risk for meetings is virtual only. Whereas the health and safety of board members, city officials, employees, staff, and members of the public is best served by holding electronic meetings of the board, whereas the board has prepared for and demonstrated the ability to effectively conduct its public meetings electronically, including providing members of the public means to observe the board's meetings and provide comments electronically. Now, therefore, I conclude that conducting the Water Conservation and Drought Management Advisory Board meetings with an anchor location that is physically accessible for members of the public to attend in person presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination will expire 30 days after the day upon which I made the determination. It is possible the circumstances could warrant future determinations, and so I may reissue future written determinations at that time. Jeremy Lynch, Board Chair, Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. Okay. On to, I hope everyone enjoyed that. On to approval of the minutes. Did everyone have a chance to look at June 9th minutes? Any comments or feedback? They are included in the packet, included in the agenda, I should say, hyperlink there.
I didn't have any comments on them. I thought they looked pretty good.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes without any changes.
Okay,
I'll second that.
Okay, Eve makes a motion, Arnie seconds. Any further discussion, I should say?
They were good.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes. On to board and staff reports, under which we'll include updates from Carly Castle and Andy McVeigh. Maybe we'll start with those, and then we'll move on to other board and staff reports, if that works for the group. How about Carly? Are you prepared to talk about Cat Creek fire mitigation?
I sure am, and I know Chuck has been doing some work on this too. So Chuck, feel free to jump in where I'm missing something. So the city has done some mapping of the fire to understand how it may have impacted our watershed. The good news is that it's mostly in the Cat Creek watershed, which the city doesn't draw much water from there. There is an impact to the Mill Creek watershed, however, and of course the water suppliers and the Forest Service and the BLM and Grand County and Sanjuan County are concerned about the potential for flooding and debris flow, sediment, all of that after a fire of this size. We are waiting for 2 reports to be completed by the federal government, the federal agencies. The BEAR team is completing their report this week. Is that right, Chuck? And then they're also completing an NRCS report. And the purposes of those reports is to assess the damage and to potentially recommend whether some infrastructure needs to be put in place, some permanent infrastructure to protect our communities from flooding. It was a smaller fire as far as like bear reports go, so there may not be any recommendation for permanent infrastructure. But once we receive word of that, Grand County and San Juan County will be taking the lead on any federal process that needs to happen to acquire funds and to engineer those solutions. In the meantime, we're meeting kind of regularly with different agencies, especially emergency management personnel, to monitor for the potential for flooding. And we're just going to see how it goes this summer during this monsoon season, and hopefully we don't have too big of a rainstorm. And we're not really anticipating a flood, but we are monitoring to make sure there isn't one. The one other element when it comes to impacts from the fire for the city's municipal water supply is a potential concern for contamination. And so we are monitoring our springs and wells, or just the springs check, not wells, springs for turbidity, sediment flow. So we are expecting, if there are to be impacts, it's probably a month out, and we have established some monitoring to make sure there is no impact. We don't anticipate one, but it's possible. Does that answer your questions? Yeah, Arnie?
Did you attend the discussion with Pat Creek residents last night from 6 to 8?
No, we had a council meeting. So the only meetings we've attended, we did a tour of Huntington Canyon, which
that was a good tour.
Great tour. And then we've been meeting internally, like at a staff level, but we're not aware of that meeting. That it was San Juan County that put that on, right?
It was the Forest Service and the individuals that you're working with the state of Utah emergency response team, which is a conglomeration of all those agencies. Yeah. They actually hosted it. It was at somebody's house in San Juan County, yes, but they hosted it, and it was a hybrid meeting, and it was really rather well done. A lot of the things that you mentioned there have come a little closer to fruition. And Daniel Lay, a hydrologist for the BLM, is going to not re-give, but after we had another conversation with some hydrogeologists too today about possible impacts to the drinking water sources, another hour-long meeting. But either that, all of that material is going to be put together and presented at the MOAB meeting next week on Wednesday. We have an hour long to discuss that. The NRCS will be there, and they will not only have a really cool map of the severity of the burn, as well as the results of the bear matrix of instability and so on and so forth, and what sort of actual projects, infrastructure the Forest Service will be has already decided what they're going to put in, and the NRCS should have theirs done too by then, and Ammon will be speaking with that. It's a really cool map. I'd just like to note at this point in time that the severity of the burn, 50% of it was in the low range, 49%. The low or nothing, or no burn, and 49% was in the moderate, and only 2 was in the high severe range. So we're in pretty good shape in terms of, I guess some folks say we dodged the bullet. That being said, the amount of infrastructure we might be considering is much smaller than they did at the Huntington and the Sealy fire. But some of that infrastructure will be necessary. But what I will say is that it would be great if some of you folks wanted to attend the MOAB meeting. And after the MOAB meeting, I will take Daniel's presentation and send it to everybody on the email list for the water board, so they can at least have Daniel's and the NRCS's presentation on the fire, which everything should be complete. I was told last night that the bear report was as good as signed, and there weren't going to be any changes to it. So that's my story.
Okay. And I don't have any more updates, or if there are any other questions for me, but no, I don't see any.
Well, thank you, Carly. We appreciate the update.
All right, see you guys.
Take care. Okay, Annie is here. Would you like to talk about city parks watering? Oh, you're on mute at the moment.
Thank you. So my name's Annie McVeigh, and I'm the Parks, Recreation, and Trails Director, and I'm relatively new in the first month of this position, and I was asked to come speak to you guys today, which is pretty exciting. I wanted to give you an overview of what our water usage in the parks looks like. I don't have an overall number or quantity of water. It's a report that we haven't done in the past. So I'm gathering it from different information or different sources, and we'll get back to you. But I wanted to run through how we use water in our parks and then open it up for any discussion. So we have 5 parks that are our main water users, where we irrigate. We do irrigate at night, usually starting about 11 p.m. Depending on the number of zones each park irrigation system has, we water anywhere from 4 to 7 hours in the evening. I'll go over, like I said, the 5 big ones and then talk a little bit about some of the smaller areas that we water. Center Street Park, we water Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. There are 12 zones there, and I take every zone. By default is usually set to an hour, and then depending on how the turf is looking that day or that week, we might take that to a lower amount. So it's usually 40 to 50 minutes for Center Street for those 12 zones. Lions Park, for the grass section, we water Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. There are 10 zones, and it's usually 1 hour for each of the zones. For the flowers and the planter islands, that's on a drip system for Lions, and we water Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for about 2 hours. Rotary Park, there's a top and a bottom. For the bottom area of Rotary Park, we water Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. That's 5 zones, and each for an hour. The top part, which is the perimeter, is Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday. They're 10 zones, and they're more like 30 minutes. For Swanee Park, we have 11 zones that we run for an hour, and 2 zones that we run for 25 minutes. And that is Sunday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Saturday. And the only reason we don't water on Monday is we want the grass to be dry enough to mow the next morning. Otherwise, we would do it every day of the week. And then also we have Old City Park. And for Old City Park, all of our irrigation water comes from the pond. And that is Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And there's 11 zones, and they run for an hour each. We have smaller areas around the city that we use drip irrigation systems for. And there is an area on the Mill Creek that's near the Sand Flats Drive. There's also Dixie Park, Gonzo Park, the Dog Park, Aggie Boulevard, Ute Circle Park, a strip near Grand Oasis, and the Anonymous Park. There's only one of our systems that we use sensors for, and that is at Lions, and it is a rain sensor. And right now, it really hasn't been effective in changing the water usage out there. But all of our systems are adaptable to sensors if we wanted to try like a soil sensor or a weather service.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, either related to the information Annie's just related, or maybe a future topic of discussion that we'd like to host? Yes, Mike, and then.
Yeah, so question for Annie, maybe from Mila as well. So we talked last night at the council meeting about smart timers, and it sounds like that's what you've got in part. My question for you is, being an engineer and knowing that whatever can go wrong will. And I remember Rose Marie, when she was here, passed out some water sensors as well. So my question is, if you're depending on feedback from a moisture sensor, and for some reason the device isn't installed properly, okay, in other words, it's supposed to be measuring moisture at a certain soil level or whatever, which I would guess is fairly easy to do. You know, I mean, I used to run a homeowners park way back in Boulder in the old days, and whatever can go wrong will. I mean, stuff would get run over with a lawnmower and cars would hit it and on and on and on. So my question is, on the smart timers, is the way to make sure they don't overwater if the moisture sensor isn't working or indicating things are dry when they really aren't, I guess is my question. You ever see that?
I have not seen it. If anything, I think it would be the opposite. It would underwater, in my experience.
Yeah.
And right now we have our park staff on the ground has their eyes on the soil and the turf all the time. So they are kind of our sensors in some ways right now that's most effective. And they have the ability on their phones to change the time of any park and the settings there too. So right now they're our best sensors, but we're more than happy to experiment with like a soil moisture or something moving forward.
Okay, so that's the smart part, your staff.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. That helps.
Um,
Go ahead, Eve.
yeah. Are you considering the whole Center Street complex to be the Center Street Park, like the gym area and the Moonstone, and also the ball fields? Is that all?
We have sorry to cut you off, but yes, no, we right now in this report is just the ball fields, but the Center Street complex is one of the larger users as well. So we should add that to the list as we monitor things.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like a park. Seems like a park to me.
I know, I agree. I think it's just how we look at it from our perspective, but yes, we should definitely look at that more holistically.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any other questions at this time? Yeah.
I'm just curious. I know that the governor's orders were for, or suggestions, I guess, were for all city property to be watered only 3 times a week in southern Utah. Did you guys consider that yet, or is that?
Yeah, that's actually a really good comment. So we have adjusted them back a fair bit, but not to those levels. If we did, we would definitely see some grass that is yellow or dying, and we get a lot of feedback from the community wanting greener. So it's sort of a balance, which I would love to discuss further, kind of where we find that balance of people really like green parks and how we accomplish that, the goal of reducing water.
Cool.
Yeah, so if I may interject another question. Cara isn't here. I wish she was, but she's always hammering on us about watering deep enough rather than shallow. If I got this right, you guys maybe know a lot more about this than I do. So if you guys can try to incorporate whatever the proper technique is for watering not too deep and not too shallow and so forth.
Yes, the reason, part of the reason for the time.
Okay, yeah, and that's kind of how the timing, why we have the time as long as we do, and sort of that zones the amount of hours they go. And I can get a more detailed answer from some of our staff if you'd like.
Okay, I'm curious. I don't know anything about it. I mean, I just.
Gotcha.
Anyone else have anything at this time? Otherwise, I suppose if we do have questions, or as we're moving through developing an educational campaign or assisting with that process, calling on Annie to ask questions probably be a great opportunity for us. Arnie, do you have something?
I was just going to thank Annie for talking to us. It's nice to meet you. Welcome aboard.
Oh, thanks. Nice to meet you as well.
Well, thank you, Annie.
Thanks.
And we'll move on in our agenda to the Water Conservation Plan update, review of, Arnie, would you like something prior? Oh,
Yeah, well,
excuse me, we just went to board and staff reports. Is that what you're going to?
Board reports. Does it? I was going to say.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's swing back around. And if anyone here has a board and staff report, maybe Arnie does. I don't know, maybe someone else does.
I don't know if Chuck wants to maybe just briefly talk about the water management plan that they presented last night at the city council. That might be a good staff report.
Great.
I can do that, and I'll keep it brief, more than I did last night. Anyway, yeah. So we've come up with a scope of work, essentially. Sorry, for a water resource master plan in discussions with Sanjuan County Special Services District, GWISA, and soon to be MOAB Irrigation Company. So the 4 water providers in the valley, and we're looking at this as a valley-wide water resources management plan that will include evaluations of groundwater, surface water, sources. And we're going to look at it over a 100-year timeline, knowing full well that anything past 20 years is very crystal ballish, but we'll do as much as we can. We're not going to get wrapped around the axle with how much water there is left or is not left. You know, we think that there's good enough numbers right now after all the good work that everyone's done to do that. And we've got a timeline of about 1 year to get this done. And we think that'll provide, we'll end up with an implementation plan and a schedule for either a project or a series of projects that'll help achieve those goals. And, you know, it could include everything from new secondary irrigation systems in certain portions of the valley that may not be there now to reduce the impacts on culinary water, to more source exploration, or could include other measures that we don't know about yet. But that's good news. GWISA and the city have and the county have all agreed that we have funding for it, and we're going to hire a third-party consultant to do that. And we'll have a stakeholder group. We'll obviously keep the board informed of it, this board informed as we move along, and hopefully that'll happen in the very near future. Be happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Eve.
Well, I have a few questions. One is that I thought that Mark Stilson wanted to wait until the adjudication process was complete before such an entity was formed. So there's the question of if this is happening irregardless of where the state stands. And I just wanted to point out that in the documents you refer to Sanjuan County, I think the official name is the San Juan Spanish Valley Special Service District. And I just wanted to point out that the last time we met in a room, at least when I was there, those guys from that special service district wouldn't even sit at the table. So maybe you could comment on how they've come around. And then
Well, can I do those three so I can remember them? And I won't, because that you
well,
asked.
The only other point I wanted to ask about was where MOAB comes into play in all of this, because it seems like you don't know that much about it, but it seems like they've been talking about this for years. And so I guess I just wonder where they fit into this. Thanks.
I'll try and remember all four of those questions, Eve. If not, you may have to repeat some of them for me. Am I on the, yeah. So yeah, you're right, at San Juan Spanish Valley Special Services District. You're exactly right. And we've had 2 meetings with them already. I can only say that maybe that was then and this is now. I mean, times have changed. Knowledge of the aquifer and the impacts of climate and drought have, I think, brought a lot of people's awareness around. And all I can say is they seemed cooperative and interested in working together with us. And there's new administration in San Juan County too, you know, not the Special Services District. I don't know about that, but they have a new county administrator and we're working with him as well as with that district. And the other is Mark Stilson's on board with this plan. This is not the groundwater management plan that has been discussed as an outcome of potential safe yield designation by the state UDWRI. This, because that may or may not ever come. We don't know. The current state engineer, according to Mark, is not a big fan of implementing those safe yield designations. You know, I'm speaking for what I've heard secondhand from both her and with Mark. So, I mean, but I have heard it from her, so I guess it's not secondhand. So this is an effort for the Valley to be proactive and look at our own and in control. This will be a locally led plan as opposed to a plan made by the state. The state will obviously be informed and hopefully, and they'll be involved with it. We haven't asked them for money yet, but I kind of did, and I didn't get a yes or a no. But the good news about this, and we believe at least, is this is composed of the water providers. Now, this answers 2 of your questions about where MOAB fits in and I can't speak for MOP. I can only tell you about this group. But these are the water providers. These aren't who have a special responsibilities per Utah Constitution and legislation. So we think that, at the end of the day, we're the ones who have to provide the water to the residents and the visitors of this valley. So that's why this users group is the providers. If I didn't say it, there's public and stakeholder engagement in this scope of work. Certainly MOP would be involved with that. Lots of agencies, lots of the public would be involved, but the funders and the purpose is make sure that we have that water supply. I won't call it an assured water supply, but a water supply going into the future. So that's why it's a little different, but Mark is supportive of this because one, it's going to happen now rather than wait for a designation. And the other thing that's different about it, if he does his groundwater management plan, I don't know how to say this exactly, but they have their own models and they'll be focused on groundwater, whereas this plan can expand and we'll look at water, both ground and surface water sources, and can they be managed in an alternative way and perhaps a more efficient, more effective ways going into the future. So, and I think that's why we got a buy-in from the water providers, and because it's a way to treat this resource as a resource that we need to respect and value moving forward. And we can move now rather than having to wait for the state. And we have a sense of urgency to us here at the city that we need to be proactive on this. If I answered your questions.
Yeah, and just one follow-up is one of the commissioners or council members last night brought up I think it was Ronnie, about the sort of the layers of authority. And it seems like the city's the only player that is sort of the water authority, if you will, of the city is directly controlled by the commissioners. But the San Juan and Grand Water and Sewer are sort of a step removed from the commissions. And I'm wondering, yeah.
So I had a discussion with Dana this morning about that to understand what her special district's authorities were. And they don't have the land use authority or the policing powers that the city does. So the city is, because we're the municipal water provider and we're the body politic over the city for planning and zoning and that, the point is, well, if there are conservation ordinances that need to be passed in the city, the same city council that is the municipal water, controls the municipal water supply, also has the land use authority and other policing powers to implement those ordinances. And where we left it was, and of course, Dana and I aren't the deciders, but we're having the conversation about it is, yes, we need to have conversations with the county about how we would incorporate them into utilizing those land use authorities in the unincorporated area that GWISA may agree to work with the city on. Not that they'll be exactly the same, but they're already talking about a time of day of week ordinance, she told me today. And I think Mila's going to talk about that here in a little bit as well. And the same reason we have the county administrator involved with discussions with the San Juan Spanish Valley Special Services District is that's the linkage to the San Juan County land use and policing powers authority. So yeah, it's one of those things that needs to be defined or refined, I guess, as we move along. But yeah, it's a good point, but there's a path forward that we're already working on with it.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Steve.
So I watched the meeting last night. I agree with your plan. If you look at other communities, the model that you guys have proposed is a very common one, and it seems to work well, where the providers are the ones that develop the plan with public input. I think it's a good deal.
Thank you.
Mike. You're on mute, Mike.
Sorry about that. I've seen Mr. Stilson work now in 2 or 3 meetings talking about water supply availability, and he's been pretty consistent. His boss has changed positions. There's a woman running at a different person who's not big on groundwater management plans, and he basically said, "You guys work it out yourself." He also said that he has been consistent. I'll say that for him. He's also said we don't have any money. All right, he'd like to drill some more monitoring wells and do some more work and so forth. But if he had any money that he was willing to kick in, he didn't say anything about it in the last meeting out at the county facilities maybe a week ago. Another data point for you is, while it makes perfect sense to rope Sanjuan County Special Service District into the local water providers consortium, if you will. And Mark, reading between the lines, he's not paying much attention to it, frankly, because they only have 500 acre feet from one well that they've been permitted to use. And the remaining 4,500 acre feet, Mark didn't say anything specifically, but I get the idea that because the latest studies have showed that there's nowhere near as much water as they thought they had back in 2011 when that was approved, that there's no chance that Sanjuan County is going to get permission to drill more wells at the top end of the valley and suck still more water out of the Glen Canyon aquifer. He didn't say that, but that's what I'm assuming he meant when he said, "Don't worry about Sanjuan County." He said, in his opinion, the 2 main entities that we were worried about were the city and the county. And there was a statement made last night on a similar vein, and I hope I heard her correctly, that Carly thought that Grand County had a lot of unused water rights. They do have some unused water rights, but they're not nearly as significant as what the city has. Chuck, you can correct me if you're wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, but the city has something on the order of 10,000 acre feet altogether, and we're using maybe 3.5, something on that order.
Yeah, we're really right about 8,000, Mike, and of good senior perfected water rights, and we're using about 3. You're right.
Okay.
It's still quite a bit.
So the county is in much more dire straits when it comes to expansion. And furthermore, they're the ones that are seeing 2 or 3% growth. We're seeing 1. So the county has a way bigger problem than we do. And I will admit, in my clamor to get the state to declare a safe yield, that if we were to do so, it would be, in a sense, shooting ourselves in the foot, all right, to voluntarily, as it were, quit withdrawing more water from the Glen Canyon aquifer, because there would be no legal constraint on anybody else, including the county, to do so. Okay, so that would be the single biggest reason to have that enshrined in the state statute. I am super disappointed, frankly, in DWR for basically Mark has chosen to ignore the best science. He doesn't say he disputes it, but he doesn't trust it. I think it's political pressure from his boss. They don't want to get into it. And I say I'm disappointed because this is exactly how West Utah got themselves in trouble something like 20 years ago, and they're still digging their way out of depleted aquifers. And Mark has said many times he doesn't want us to get into that situation, and he sees that we're not there yet. So my complaint is that without a stick at the end of the carrot, okay, there's really nothing to stop us from drilling all the wells that we want until the wells do run dry. And I'm trying to get us to look ahead and not go there. And without any luck, I'm not getting any support from the city. I'm not getting any support from DWR and so forth. In my opinion, that's a wise thing to do, is to follow the best science. And I have suggested ways to incorporate air bands into what the best models predict, but nobody wants to hear that either. So I'm a little dismayed, the whole thing, frankly. I mean, I applaud Carly for putting together a plan and so forth. All that's great. But it raises the question, well, what about MOPS? Why is the city doing this all by themselves? Blah, blah, blah. And without the state to kind of sit out there and not supervise is the wrong word, but to conduct, if you will, and to have a final legal say on it, it's kind of toothless, in my opinion. So we can all talk about how to share what's out there and so forth, but as I say, without a stick out there, without a official recognition that we have a finite amount of water out there, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I'm trying to get at here. We talk about 100 years all you want, but there's no way we can accommodate another 9,000 people like you discussed in your plan, Mila. Okay, not in my opinion. Conservation will help, but there's no way it's going to make up for the additional demand required by a lot of new people and new businesses moving into this town and so forth. We're not really doing anything different other than just getting together and talking. So with that, I will stop at my little polemic right here. But so there you go. That's my staff report.
Eve.
I just wanted to get some clarification. When Mark Stilson says not to worry about San Juan, I guess the thing that I've always worried about is Sitla. Is it, and there hasn't, there's only that 500 acre feet, but is the thing that we have to worry about that they're tying into groundwater and sewer? And is there anything that can protect us from Sitla and their 5,000 roofs or whatever it is out in San Juan County? Maybe I missed some stuff.
Chuck, you may know more than I do. To my knowledge, except maybe in an emergency situation, San Juan County is not talking about tapping into Grand County's water. We are providing sewer service for them, of course. That's a different deal.
That's correct.
The remainder of the water, the San Juan County, they're 5,000 acre feet. If they want it, they'll have to get it out of the river, up Cane Creek Canyon, big climb, BLM country, a lot of bridges, blah, blah, blah. It would be very expensive for them to do so, and they certainly could. But Mark didn't sound like he thought that they would get another well up on top where it's relatively cheap and easy.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, Eve, what I heard Mark saying isn't that we should ignore, and Mike, you didn't say that, ignore San Juan County, but that the drivers of the plan, because we're the biggest users, are the city and GWISA. So we're the ones who need to be the drivers of this water resource management plan, as opposed to San Juan County. They'll participate because they're in our water, they're within our aquifer watershed, and because they're users. They're a special district that provides municipal water, essentially. But the context I got out of Mark is that the city and the county have, GWISA have the resources, both staff and leadership, to go ahead and make this happen. And that San Juan's not going to step out and lead this plan.
Yeah, well, more importantly, the city and the county have senior water rights.
Yeah, sure. There you go. That too. But they need to be at the table. I think, I know I feel that way, and I think the state does too. The same way we'll have to incorporate MOAB Irrigation, because again, those are the water providing agencies. And when it comes down to it, those need to be the decision makers on how they're going to provide water, or if they're going to provide water. There's all sorts of issues there.
Oh, I agree with you, Chuck. I think they should be at the table with us all. I'm just saying it wasn't very long ago I thought we were going to look at a city of 15,000 people out there with another 5,000 acre feet of water being sucked out of the aquifer, and I don't think that much is going to happen.
I don't think so either. And that, especially after talking with Mark, because I agree, he said the same thing, that their 500 is all they're ever going to get for groundwater management, but they do have the 4,500 potential to pull from the river or someplace else. And as you said, that's a huge undertaking.
Okay. Hey, one other thing I want to add, we've talked a lot about incorporating MIC's surface water into a secondary water system, which is all admirable and so forth. I just want to make you aware that it's not a panacea by any means. For one thing, Many years ago, it was all farms up the valley, and it's migrated over the decades to city users, just like myself. All right, I'm a small town user with my 2 shares and 8 acre-feet of water. Supposedly, I can pump over here on the east side of town, and there's about 125, something like that, people like me with small-time users that are already not using city's culinary water to irrigate with, because MOAB Irrigation Company water is a lot cheaper. I pay, I don't know, 100 and some odd bucks for an annual fee or something like that. I don't know, but it's much cheaper than it would be to do it from the city. So if you, and MOAB Irrigation Company only has about 3 CFS to work with, okay? They've got a grand total of about 6,000 acre-feet, which is a total flow of Mill Creek, but the vast majority of that goes into Kins Lake. There's some farms up on the mountains as well, and there's other people farming out east of town and so forth. So we could incorporate them into the city system, which would be great, but you know, picking up brand new residences that are now depending on city culinary water to irrigate their lawns with and switching them over to secondary system means that you're robbing from Peter to pay Paul, I guess is what I'm trying to say. In other words, we already have a bunch of people in town who are doing exactly that. So there's something to be gained from it, but that whole 3 CFS, you're not gonna see 3 CFS decline in the city's culinary water just because suddenly people are using surface water, because it's already happening. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you're right. It's not a panacea. I completely agree with you. But I think we're entering the realm of percentages. If we can be more efficient, you know, it's like going from an open ditch system to a pipe system. We all know about the savings in evapotranspiration. Yeah, it costs money, but maybe there's money out there sometimes to convert some of that. I mean, there are programs. I know there are programs, just as one example. So yeah, I agree with you, Mike. It's not a panacea, but it's the intent is to look at the resource, make some decisions, you know, look at it enough in real time and have the players at the table who are involved with the water and start looking at alternatives and then make some decisions that make sense.
Okay, so just to clarify that much, thank you, Chuck. Irrigation company, long before I got here, I don't know, 90s, whatever it was, that's when they started replacing all the open ditches in town with closed 12-inch pipes, I think. There are still a few places in town, down my street is one of them, where they pick up 2 or 3 users, another block or 2 down the street, where the water does run down the curb, and we get complaints every cotton picking week about what a waste of water. And it looks like it, okay? And it is a waste of water, frankly, but that's a relatively minor loss compared to all the stuff that is in fact going through closed ditches. Closed pipes, I should say.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone else have anything to add? Arnie?
Hi, everybody. I'm up at Fish Lake. Guess what it's doing here? It's raining. It's raining, yeah. And we filled up half our cistern in the last 3 days from our rainwater harvesting system here, which is our only source of water in this modest log home. As for Eve's question, in terms of San Juan, I was referring to a meeting that I wanted to expound on in just a second that we had with Mark, but some members of the San Juan Special Service District did show up, and there has been a change. It appears to be in the board members. Their website for the San Juan Special Services District is now kaput, and it's being, the website for them is being hosted by GWISA. And it's interesting to note also that several of the board members for the San Juan Special Services District and GWISA are the same members. So there has been a change in the actual people associated with the San Juan Special Service, and they're willing to come to the table. And these are not, this isn't Stitland, these are old time residents. So so be it. And then the other thing I was going to say, as far as the MOP goes, I think that this is a great opportunity for the water providers to come up with some new ideas. And if they're all up agreed upon it, it makes for a much powerful coalition than just the city or county saying we're going to do something, or the great GWS saying we're going to do something. I'm assuming the meetings will probably be open to the public. Chuck, is that there? Again, then the minutes will be available somewhere if people want to see them. And as you're developing plans, I would encourage you to visit a MOP meeting and get an agenda item on there. One thing that's great about the MOP is the number of ideas that you can get from the different users that have been around this valley for so long now. So as you start scoping some of your projects, I would suggest you bring them to the MOP meeting as an agenda item to get ideas from people.
Sure,
Okay,
I think MOP's a great resource, Arnie. I agree.
That's what the MOP does. Okay, we don't have any power over nothing. All we do is get people together with ideas. So I would encourage that. That being said, I got nothing else to say on this water, whatever we're calling it. I'm sorry, Chuck, I didn't remember the name. Water Planning Commission.
It's a water resource management plan.
Water resource management plan. I think it's a great idea.
Great.
Okay, any other staff or board reports before we move forward?
We did have a meeting on the 8th. Mark was pushing for that meeting, and several other people were too, where we were going to talk about more monitoring in the valley. And Mark did make a big push once again, like Mike was saying, to move to get a dual completion well and put in by the city, and he pushed to Mark, Joe Lessant, and Carly, and they agreed that if somebody would have paid for it, they'd be happy to put it in and do the monitoring associated with it. Chuck and Levi, I'm assuming that, once again, we've had this conversation before, where if we were to get capital funds to install something like that, your agencies would not mind maintaining it and collecting data. And right. I think we're still there on that one. It's just finding the funding for it at this point in time. And then he hinted that there's also going to be a gauge, or Dana said that she's going to put a gauge at the top of Pack Creek below Brumley Creek, so we can get a better idea of how much water is actually coming out of there on an annual basis. You get maybe a better number on the annual recharge to Spanish Valley Offer. Okay, so Mike, and did I miss anything else? I'm still writing the notes up from that meeting. A lot of it you and me have seen before when Mark presented. I encouraged Mark not to represent everything that most of us have already seen. Was there anything else you got out of that meeting that we had the other day on monitoring?
Takeaways. I guess the fact that I'm him and Han means there wasn't anything particularly stuck in. The meeting was supposedly to talk just about monitoring wells. Okay, and it kept drifting back to total water quantity kinds of things. And
right. So Mike, one thing I will just say at this point in time is that I agree with you completely that, and I don't blame Mark Stilson and I don't blame Teresa. I blame the Utah Division of Water Rights Law that is preventing them from doing the right thing at this point in time. I do not like their business plan in the big picture of how they deal with the water they own for the state. But I don't blame Mark or Teresa necessarily. I think it's the body politic, not the body politic, but the organic act that they are working under that is a problem at this point in time. It's Western water law. Probably should have been defined 20 years ago, but nobody wants to touch it.
Yeah.
Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Okay.
By the way, Arnie, and I don't want anybody to freak out here because I'm not going to do it. This is my last year council, and I don't want to go down in history as a guy who started $1 million lawsuit against the city that we can't afford to pay. So I'm not going to do it, but I'm tempted, all right, because to sue freaking DWR to enforce state statute, okay, because that's what it says. Use science to best estimate safe yield. And that's exactly what USGS and their people have done. And so to force them to do that, and realistically speaking, I don't think I can, short of otherwise we'd start looking like Sanjuan County going after tilting at windmills and stuff like that. And I don't want to go down doing that.
I will speak to
Yeah.
that too, Mike, and that is that the problem that we're seeing with UDWRI fulfilling what we believe its intended goals are not, we're not the only community with that issue. Bryce Canyon and Ruby's Inn and all that area has that same issue, too many developers, too much sit-in land, not enough water. And at this point in time, the Division of Water Rights is being sued by both sides. So maybe their legal action will help solve ours. Can't say that for sure, but it is going on. Okay?
Thank you.
If no one else has anything at this time, that was a long enough pause. We'll move on to the Water Conservation Plan Update Review. Hila, if there's a particular way you'd like to run through this, or just open it up to questions or considerations, or if anyone has a comment at this point at the outset, otherwise I'll leave it to you to walk us through where we're at.
Sure. So I think similar to our discussion with the City Council last night, it's probably the most useful to talk about the conservation related suggestions, proposals, etc. I think that's the rest of it is mostly information that we still need to get some from Chuck and from Levi to fill out some of those state requirements. They do report all of that to the state every year, so we're not going to focus too much on those numbers. But I think some of these conservation policies, there's a lot of different ideas. They are incredibly wide as far as the financial commitment that would be required. So I would love to, and I mean, I'm sure people have, other things that they'd like to say, but for me, I think the most useful thing would be to get some feedback on which ones you think we should prioritize as far as, at least, we can do the ordinances first. Those are kind of the low hanging fruit. And then as far as these other programs, I'd love to hear your thoughts about those and where we want, kind of how we want to roll them out and what you think about the goal. I don't think that we've had a chance to discuss that with the water board yet. I think that was something that came up with staff conversations in the past few weeks.
So, Mila, I got an opportunity to read the entire plan right before this meeting. Woohoo! I had 4 small comments on it, but your questions are probably more pertinent. I liked the way you'd set up that 5-year plan in terms of what conservation goals you're going to go after and when. I thought that was realistic, and I thought at least the practices anyways, was realistic, and I'm wholeheartedly in favor of the schedule you have for implementing them. I think it's reasonable and can be done. I don't think you're going to obtain the water conservation goals that you're trying to get to, but that's neither here nor there. If you make it to those goals, more power to you. Okay. I don't see that happening. But I do see that the goals that are the recommendations that you've made and the way you're going to implement them seems very reasonable to me, and they all seem like reasonable practices and expectations. I do have 4 comments on that plan, and maybe I should make them offline to you at some point in time. They're not big comments. Okay.
Yeah, I think I saw that you put them in the Google Doc, so that's great. And I will say, I know I agree. Goals are goals for a reason. Gotta shoot high. I think it's Phoenix metro area actually did reduce their outdoor watering by 40% over the course of maybe a decade. I don't remember exactly what the dates were, but it can be done, which is pretty impressive. But yes, we're definitely shooting high.
Hey, Mila, 2 bits. I like the way you organize the report too. Thank you very much. It's a huge amount of work. I will say that the plot that you're talking about from 2015 to the present of total water use and so forth, I used to do random spacecraft signals for a living, and I got to tell you, if you think there's a trend in there, it's not really obvious to me. It looks kind of like it's a pretty random component with seasonal fluctuations and so forth. But nonetheless, it will sell. So thank you very much. We'll see if we can do it for till 2030. That'll be the trick.
Eve, did you have a comment?
Well, I guess I just have a question. So I didn't see any edits in the Google Doc, but Arnie, you're saying you just did that today? Today?
Within the last, within an hour and a half before this meeting.
Okay, because well, I guess I don't have a comment about the goals. I just wonder about the copy editing of the document. I have a hard copy and I made quite a few corrections and so on. And I wondered, well, I know it's just a draft, but there are a couple of things that I think, I'm not sure if you've submitted it yet, but you refer to the city's Colorado River rights, and I'm pretty sure we don't have any, so you might want to take that part out. It was like a placeholder. And I think Carly sort of clarified that at the meeting last night, that we don't have Colorado River rights.
We have 3 acre-feet of Colorado River rights is all.
Okay.
Which is hardly worth talking about. But, and then the other thing, just sorry to interrupt you, but just our water attorney has told us that 90% of our existing rights, if for some reason we wanted to convert them to Colorado River rights, we could. And Stilson has said that as well, but there's not much difference between none and 3, but I just wanted to, we've been told it's 3 acre-feet, which is essentially none.
And is it really the case that that Mick has senior water rights for almost the entire Mill Creek drainage? Is that right? Huh, okay. So that seems spooky to me. And then, yeah, so, but it seems like there were a bunch of assignments that members of the board had that were sent to you, Mila, and then they weren't incorporated. Can you speak to that?
I incorporated all the assignments that were sent to me. They're all in there.
I didn't see the ones that I sent, and it seemed like others didn't see what they had sent.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have all the documents that I've gotten, I incorporated.
Yeah, I agree. By the way, I didn't see, I sent you 2 pieces, Mila, and one of them is in there, the one about MIC. But I sent some more in there about the watershed quantity, and I did not see that material either.
I'm not sure that I saw that one either. I think I only remember getting the MIC one from you.
No, there was another one. Well, there was another one that was sent in before you came on board. Maybe that's why you didn't see it. Oh,
potentially. Yeah, I'll have to look at that one. I'm not sure if I missed that, but I did put in that the MIC document, but that's obviously in there.
Okay. May I send you that document again then?
Yeah, what is it in regards to?
Oh, it talks about the watershed from a source point of view. Kind of gives you a 1-page summary of the different studies that have been done and brief history. I mean, it was designed to be readable by somebody up at state who's not intimately familiar with our area, but give them some idea of the top level stuff.
Okay, great. Yeah, that would be great. That's one of the gaps that we have right now. I was waiting for engineering to have a little bit more time to be able to describe some of the state of the science. So that would be great.
Okay, I'll see if I can find it again. Thank you.
Arnie.
So, Mila, the only thing I didn't comment on, I thought it was also very well written. You're a much better writer than I will ever be. Okay. But to speak to Eve's concern, I'd forgotten I'd written so much of that document. Everything. I got like 6 sections in there, and all of them are included. And you did make some minor changes to a couple of them, and I appreciate the changes that you made. I don't think I had none of my comments reflect in that I gave in that Google document. But Eve, everything that I sent her is in the document.
All right, I could resend the stuff that I had.
Yeah, if I missed something that you sent me, I'm sorry about that.
And that's okay. One of the things, so in the old plan, there was an executive summary, and it might be too early to write such a thing, but this time there's an introduction instead. And it seemed like the spirit of the thing last time was so that an executive or a council member or a member of the public could quickly read a one-page overview, not just of introducing the project or the nature of what this report is, but to actually, in a nutshell, sort of summarize where the city of Moab is and where it's headed. So that obviously doesn't need to happen until later, but I think it's helpful for the council members and those people who would want to just get the 20,000 foot view. You talk about the goal on the first page in the introduction, and you talk about how the city's going to meet the goal, but there's no mention of limits to growth. And it seems like that is kind of the conversation that people are having. So I just wanted to acknowledge that limiting growth is one of the solutions.
I think what we had actually decided on this goal because it does not require a limit to growth. When Chuck and I and Carly went over the numbers with the population projected population increase, with no changes, then we would still be able to meet that goal.
Okay.
Can I speak? So Mila, you do talk about population increases and the change in planning and zoning in the middle of that document. And you're taking the middle of the road scenario in terms of population projections at this point in time, 1%.
Yeah.
And that's what you're planning on for the next 10 years. And I think that's great. I think Eve's concern is that it's not mentioned anywhere in the executive or in the introduction that you're not necessarily planning on limiting growth. You're going to use what is currently happening and move forward. I think that's what Eve is saying, is that
right?
Yeah,
there's
so I think what even
suggestions for limiting growth. I mean, I don't think this plan is the forum for that in general. But
I don't think so either.
But we could, one of the things that that Carly and Chuck were talking about last night was, this idea of potentially requiring certain kinds of new development to bring their own water dedications. So we could certainly put that in the plan as well as something that we're exploring. And I think, since these guys have been fleshing out their ideas, then that didn't make it into the plan yet because these efforts have been happening concurrently. So that water resource management planning process will be more detailed in there as well. And that is one of the components of their process.
So Eve, did you really want something mentioned in the introduction that says we're not planning on limiting growth due to water somewhere in the instructions, or any sort of comment on population in the introduction or executive summary? Is that what you're asking for?
Well, it just, to me, sort of as a lay person, that seems like the question that's in the top of people's minds when they want to read this. Not maybe the state, but I think it needs to be explained that if the perspective of the city is that there's no need to limit growth, then I think that needs to be said so that people will just understand that right off the top and not read the paragraph and say, well, they have all these things that they're going to do to conserve water, but they're not going to even talk about limiting growth. So I think it's worth a mention, pro or con. It just needs to be said. And yeah.
That would be in the introduction, you're saying, because it is mentioned in the body of the plan.
Oh, well, if it is, then it just needs to be stated in the, well, if it's an introduction or an executive summary, it just needs to be, it just begs the question. And so it just needs to be somewhere where
I think I agree with her, Mila, that maybe somewhere in the introduction, one sentence says that this plan doesn't say anything about limiting or restricting population and influxation, whatever, something of that sort in the introduction, so that it's clear that, and that's, I think that solves the problem there. So what do the other board members think about including a sentence like that in the introduction?
I'm not opposed to what's already there, but I don't really have any further feedback on it.
Yeah. Hey, Arnie, I apologize. So, because I was trying to deal with getting this file to Mila while you were talking. So what is this extra sentence supposed to say? I apologize.
you're muted.
Not anymore. There's a discussion in the body of the report about population projections, and they've taken a middle road for in terms of determining how much water they're going to have to save if they want to meet their conservation goals based on their population projections. Nowhere does it say anything about limiting growth in the water conservation plan. There are some things suggested that how we will manage growth to conserve water, but nothing about limiting growth. And the executive summary or introduction, as it says nothing about any population projections and how they were required or how they were brought about. And so even suggesting that in the introduction, there is some note that the population projections are based upon X, Y, and Z, not necessarily that we're going to not limit them, but where that somewhere in the introduction, what population we're using is mentioned, how we're getting there, so that we're not stating in there, I don't know if we need to state we're not planning on limiting the population. I just think that somewhere in there we need to, in the introduction, I believe so too, we need to state that where we're getting our population projections from. Okay.
Yeah, and that is that's one thing that I am really hoping that I addressed, and I also hope that we'll be able to maybe put out kind of an update to the update next year. So our population, all these projections are based on the last census, which was in 2010, and then using US Census.gov projections, and they have estimates that are different than the actual census numbers based on whatever error and other factors that they consider. And then, we have kind of decent estimates of population from there, but then I think a lot of that is going to be refined once we get the 2020 census data, which apparently will be available in 2022. So when we get those numbers, we'll be able to actually go back and refine all of this population data, because it's, obviously very possible that the latter half of the decade was more growth than that 1%. So, it'll make a big difference once we get those accurate numbers.
But as far as the introduction goes, Mila, you're not opposed to throwing a sentence in there stating that we have population projections that do not limit growth, something of that source that pose no limits to growth at this point in time. Population projection. Yeah,
there's no plan by the council, as far as I know, to do any kind of hard growth limitations. That's a really big discussion, and I think I'm happy to just make that clear if that's something that we think is necessary. But the population projections that we've used are just based on the average curve. Obviously, that may change depending on a lot of factors. And one of the things that we did talk about in the plan that hasn't been, entirely calculated out yet is all those different zoning scenarios. So,
Right.
there's build out projections, but then there's also, build out with rezone, and then, rezone everything at the top of its density. And, all of those kinds of things are all obviously very theoretical, but also pretty labor intensive. And I know engineering and planning has not had time to address that yet. So I think, kind of leaving that as potential without having to do all of the numbers, I think is, at least for now, I was fine just leaving that the way that it is currently. And we'll work on those as we go, just because it's good for us to know as a city.
So I just reread the section on the population forecast. I think that's pretty clear since you don't have updated data until 2022. I'm fine with the way it's written now.
Jared, so Mila, here's my perspective on the subject of will water limit growth? Well, duh, yes, it could. It certainly could. And I have no hesitancy about putting that right up front. It should be clear that if we've got a truly finite resource, unless you're planning on draining the aquifer, which could take decades before you're deep in the hole, and that was my concern about safe yield and so forth, that water certainly could be a limit to growth out here. We can conserve all we want, but at some point, if there's, you can't even get a half an acre foot a year out of here to plant a new home in here. It's not going to happen like that. I think it'll kind of creep in piece by piece, actually. But it's clear to me that, as far as I'm concerned, that's possible. And I'm not reluctant to say that because my political experience is that most people don't particularly want uncontrolled rapid growth in the valley, whether you're on the left or the right-hand side of the political spectrum. Most people are comfortable with the status quo. Everybody wants to be the last guy to move into the valley. Okay. And sorry, that's what I'm standing.
I think maybe one way that we would be able to address that is like we were saying with the dedication idea. As far as, once we have a really good understanding of what the water resource management plan decides is that safe yield, then, there's the possibility that development will have to essentially bring its own water. So I'm happy to write about that as kind of as addressing that issue.
Well, that's fine, Mila. You can require, I think that's an essential part of the plan, all right? But where the hell are they going to get it from? Okay. If there's just you on the grounds that you can't invent water out of the blue sky, it's got to come from all these other sources we're talking about. And if they're all tapped out eventually, end of story. Is it not?
That's the idea, though. That's how it would end up limiting, being water that limits growth. Is that if you have to bring your own water and there's no water, then you can't come.
Exactly. That's all I'm driving at here. Just opening that up. And by the way, before I come up being too crabby about the whole thing, so forgive me. I noticed the other day that Carly and yourself, Mila, had finally started talking in written documents about the difference between paper and wet water rights. That alone is a big step forward. Okay. So thank you for doing that.
So just a question. Now, are we going to write a drought management plan separately, or? So I would think that this discussion about limited water and determining that would be more in the drought management, where you don't want to create a man-made drought by over allocating your water. Just an idea.
Thanks, Steve. Eve, do you have something?
Just one more. I thought that the paragraph about the population projections was pretty good. And in the paragraph that talks about how many visitors there are in MOAB, I think that to the outside observer, it would be it would be really helpful to try to take some kind of a stab at what that actually means per night. To say 1 million people per year, that I think it's a lot more than that. I think it's 3 or 4 million a year. But if we could somehow pin it down. I tried to get some kind of number from Elaine and I couldn't. She was saying that she couldn't get the right data from the city, frankly. But if we could just say something like every single night there are 25,000 visitors drawing from the city's water supply, I think that is super graphic when there are only 5,000 people who live here. So I think that's a pretty key piece of the picture of what the water supply is like in Moab, or what the water demand is.
Sure, and yeah, we have had trouble getting the data. The city's systems have been challenging. There's been a conversion from one system to another. So I've been waiting on the overnight accommodation data from Marcy as well.
Arnie?
Yeah, one of my comments, Mila, was that I really didn't believe that all our hotels in this valley were using 95 acre feet per year. I had I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I'm having a tough time believing that's all that they're using. Is somebody else other than them doing the laundry? Is there some big laundry facility in town that's doing all the laundry for every hotel? Because they got to wash a lot of sheets. I'm really surprised that 95 acre feet is actually what you're coming up with. Whoever brought that number forward, I thought that number was not as, I'm having trouble digesting that number. I'll just leave it at that, okay?
That number comes from actual accounts, Arnie. So unless those hotels aren't paying their water bill, we tallied up the water bill of all the hotels in the city, and that's where that number comes from. The 16% we're talking about, right, Mila?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we've got the hard numbers that show it. Now, do they eat in restaurants? Yeah, sure. I mean, that's not captured in that, but just pure overnight accommodations, the hotels, those numbers are from the metering numbers. And when you think about it, they don't have lawns or car washes or anything there. It's a shower and then the laundry, like you say, that's pretty much it. And the toilet flushes that those people go through. Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah,
I'd heard 16% before, but I'm thinking 16% of 2,000 acre feet is not 95.
It's not 2,000 acre feet. It's 16% of just the commercial water.
Oh.
So residential use is what takes up the most of our water.
Right. So
commercial use is a much lower number, and it's only 16% of that commercial use.
Okay, now I'm following you. I'm still having I believe you got the numbers right. I believe you got them together. I'm just looking at it going, really? And if so, we ought to be publicizing the fact that these hotels really don't use a lot of water.
I think we do need to be honest.
Okay.
I think it's really not it's a convenient story, but I think it's not the true story. However, I will say that there was a good comment last night at the council meeting that the true water impact of the visitors is also not just the hotels.
Right.
So I think especially the car washes. What else, Chuck, uses the most water like that? I'm guessing that's a big one.
Well, it's one car wash is one of the top 10 users. Though there's only a couple of car washes here, or a few. Then there's the restaurants is another one that we should, we look at. There's several restaurants that are in the top 10 users as well. I think, that they feed the visitors and the locals though, so it's hard to break out that. At some point, it's just very difficult to break those out. They go to our parks, and the parks is one of the biggest water users in the city is our park system. The pool is also a large user. But that's for locals and for visitors, right? I mean, to answer your question, those are some of the other uses. Thank
you for parsing that out. That's interesting. maybe historically looked at the size of the building and considered something that wasn't true. And I think a lot of the responsibility for whatever it is we're doing with water here in the future falls on the residents, no matter who's using it, because like Chuck's saying, there does seem to be less of a clear line between use. Yeah, at any rate, moving on from that, does anyone else have any other further comments about the draft as it stands right now? Or Mila, is there anything else you'd like us to look a little closer at? Otherwise, it sounds like you have a submission date coming up pretty soon here.
Yeah, I'm just waiting to get some more of that technical information from other city departments, and then I'll go back through it and make sure everything looks okay and incorporate anybody's comments. I do think if anyone has any time to spend on the conservation section, any of those proposed policies or programs, you know, if there's any ones that you think would be good to prioritize over others, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that. And otherwise, yeah, we'll be sending it off to the state this month, and then hopefully bringing it. I think they said they've only got like a 2 or 3 week turnaround time on review, and then they'll get back to us with any comments, and then we'll take it to City Council. I think probably for review as an agenda item, and eventually it will need to go through a public hearing before adoption.
Hey, Mila, I was just looking for a Google Doc for the draft water conservation plan. I'm looking at my city email. Is it supposed to be in there? Am I missing it or what?
Yeah, I think so. Did everybody get that? It would have been.
I got it. It came from you, Mila,
Yeah.
and it was a separate. Yeah, it was just from you, and it was, you sent actually, I think, a hard copy and a Google Drive opportunity.
Yes. Yeah, it should have been last week.
Oh, last week. Oh.
Yeah, last
Right.
week, I think probably Wednesday when it was due for the agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question on this? The one comment I had, Levi's here right now. Levi, you there? Levi? So this section on water loss, the question I had was that it says here, I can't see them both at the same time. It's kind of hard. The overflow from the springs is not metered and bypasses the system, so would not be counted as a loss. I know that's true for Skakel Springs, where the city only counts what they actually take. But I thought for our other 2 springs on the golf course that they counted everything, and what was overflow was still counted as water being used. Is that true, Levi?
The only unmetered water source we don't use is at Skakel.
So does that make sense to you what I'm saying? That if we find a way to use the overflow during the winter from our, is it Birch Spring and Somerville? Is that what we're calling them? That would decrease our quote losses to the system, because right now it is counted as a loss.
I think that I thought Mark was telling me that the overflow is unmetered and not counted as loss.
The overflow at Powerhouse Tank is metered. It also is, it's metered prior to entering the tank. Once it enters the tank, whatever doesn't get used overflows at the tank. And it's usually during the off months. Right now we don't have anything overflowing. We don't have any water.
So I'm talking about the winter overflow, and I believe it, Levi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it's counted as a loss to the system at this point in time for winter overflow from our other springs, with the exception of Skakel.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we didn't have that part of the discussion of loss then. So we'll chat about that again.
Can you guys chat about that again? Because I actually think that it might be a significant amount of the 20% that you're losing. I don't know exactly what it is. Maybe you guys can figure it out. I don't have those numbers, but I don't think you're losing 20% from leaks. I really don't. Levi, would you agree with that?
As it varies from year to year.
It's not just leaks, right? It's
No.
It's exercising fire hydrants. We have to,
Right. Yeah.
you know, and we do have breaks sometimes. I'm not disagreeing with you, Arnie, that the 20% might not be high, and we'll look at this again now that you brought that up. We'll huddle with Levi and Mark and Mila and look at that number again to make sure we got it right. But we spent some time talking about it, so it's worth looking at again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mila, if folks want to comment, as Arnie has, on the Google Doc or resubmit anything they've submitted previously or add anything to this conversation, by what date would you need to see that? This week?
This week would be great. I think it sounds like the state is a little bit more flexible on their draft submission. So, you know, really, I would like to get it into them before the end of the month, just so that we have some time for turnaround. So, you know, as soon as possible is great, but
okay.
This week, early next week is fine.
Okay.
I sent you the new material again, Mila, so look for it. Now, if you don't see it, let me know.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, if there's nothing else, barring further discussion over these topics, we'll move on for now. Thank you to the city, to Mila, and to everyone involved, Chuck and Levi, for working so quickly on a document that is so complex. I know it's a balance, and there's a lot of language that could go in, could not go in, and I think we're probably going to come out with a really great draft that we, as you've said, can revise as needed and as science comes into play and as population data comes out. So thank you for your work on that. We don't have anything else on the agenda today. I did want to mention or bring up the topic of meeting in person next time around in August. Just to gauge people's feeling on that, can make a decision between now and then, but how are the city meetings going, city council meetings going, Mike? How's that feeling?
Fine, I guess.
That's a great.
I mean, I was there. No, I mean, I haven't heard any complaints about absence of masks. I think last night, Eve, you were there. There were hardly any masks, even in the audience, even if the audience was pretty sparse last night. So,
there were some technical difficulties last night with the streaming, and it's a new system, and there are some struggles with it. But you know, doing a hybrid meeting is complex, and Summer is doing a great job trying to get it to run correctly. But I'm not exactly sure, but I think several minutes of last night's council meeting, not the workshop, but the council meeting, were not streamed. So I have to go listen to the audio, which I think is complete. But I mean, I personally like Zoom meetings, but I can understand that we have to come out of our sheds at some point.
Some people aren't. I know the organization I work for has determined that this is the way we're meeting, even if we're in rooms right next to one another moving forward, just for the streamline aspect of it. So maybe that would be a consideration moving forward. I know there's some mention of systems the city is moving between right now. Mila and I can discuss this between now and our next meeting, make a decision at that point. I just wanted to gauge if anyone was feeling strongly about it one way or the other. This does feel efficient, but we can decide at a later date and time.
I think that the only thing I'll mention to that is that I do believe that if you want to continue meeting in person without an anchor location, you'll have to include it into the bylaws. Like adopt an actual electronic meeting policy, because the emergency COVID electronic meeting thing, I think, no longer applies. So I believe that if we want to, this time is fine, you know, last month was a while ago, but I think for moving forward, we're going to have to either have an anchor location, which is fine. I mean, we can just have that be the city and someone can, you know, theoretically come in and make a comment, or adopt an all electronic meeting policy in the bylaws.
Okay, that's good to know.
So we could put that on the agenda for next month if we want to.
Yeah, well, why don't we do that? We have a,
okay.
If there's anyone else, Steve, go first, and then we can talk about any other agenda items that anyone would like to bring up. But Steve,
I would be in favor of meeting in person. I've got a lot of gray hair and I remember the fun meetings.
It's fine with me.
Arnie,
In
do you have-
person's fine with me. In person's fine with me, although this meeting being electronic saved my ass, but that's okay.
okay.
As long as everybody's vaccinated, it's cool.
Thanks for the feedback. Okay, does anyone have anything they want to bring up in terms of agenda items for the next meeting? Otherwise, we will come up with something in the meantime, because this has been our focus for the past few meetings. And we currently don't have any, well, we have a few discussion points, but Eve, do you have something you'd like to add now?
Just that we had talked about the quorum, which is also concerning the bylaws, and it is the case that our quorum is 3, and so if we want to discuss that or potentially amend the bylaws, we should put it on the agenda for sometime in the future, next meeting or not.
There's room on the next meeting's agenda, so we could put it on the next meeting's agenda. Mila, maybe you and I can get together a little bit earlier than we usually do, maybe in the next week or two, and just talk about what we have laid out and the direction we want to take for the rest of the year, what would be useful. And maybe that can be its own discussion item at the next meeting, what we should be discussing, what we should be talking about, providing feedback on now in the aftermath of this draft plan. So, but
Yeah.
I do think we have a few items, and let's include the discussion of the quorum number.
Sure, and I sent out we can, if the water board is interested, for the next meeting as well, or just in general, I sent out a paper to Chuck and Carly regarding different concepts of yield. And I think I'll just send it around to all of you. I think it's good discussion to have moving forward. It kind of posits that there are these various concepts of yield. Safe yield is like the do or die, like this is your point of no return, versus things like sustainable yield or consensus yield, which includes community desires. And sustainable yield includes, things like environmental concerns and, wetlands and creeks and wildlife and all of that stuff. And then consensus yield includes that community component. So it might be interesting to just include that vocabulary into our discussions about water resources in general as we kind of zoom out to the bigger picture. So I'm happy to send that paper around. I thought it was pretty interesting.
Okay, please do.
Hey, Mila, that was one interesting thing at that same meeting out at Gwissa where Mark was there. You guys may remember that in the USGS, the big study, the 2016 study, he had they basically listed all the withdrawals, and near the end of Mark's DWR report, he tabulated them all and then picked out a couple that looked like they were undeveloped, so to speak. In other words, they were water to grow on. One was underflow through the valley floor, just sitting over the top of saline water, and then the other was Mill Creek and Pat Creek stream gains low in the valley, and that's after MOAB Irrigation Company has done their thing and everybody else has. And I asked Mark, well, how would one develop those waters if we wanted to do so? And he said, oh, well, the city could drill another well in the Glen Canyon aquifer, and if that ends up impacting the valley floor, then it would take water out of the valley floor aquifer and ultimately impact the wetlands. So the interesting thing for me, that was really interesting to hear him say that, because that's a cross basin transfer. Okay, and that's you have to jump through more hoops to do that. But anyway, the point is that if we want to talk about drilling more wells in an effort to develop supposedly undeveloped water, it starts to get messy, because there's not really two or three different aquifers, depending on how you define them. And the safe yield law is not only the clarifications that you just mentioned, but the other clause in the statute is one aquifer can't damage another. So that was my concern about drilling a well. And basically Mark said, drill a well and see what happens. And so we could go down that route, but I'd rather get smarter about it. But I think that's enough said on that subject right now.
Thanks, Mike. Arnie, did you have something to add?
Yes, Mila, your conversation on the concept of safe yields and environmental impacts associated with different concepts of safe yields has been brought up by several of my partners dealing with in the MOAB, definitely associated. The biggest one is the TNC and the underlying saltwater dome there, and the possibility that that could be brought to the surface at some point in time. That's the biggest one out there, but it's an agenda item, a smaller agenda item. The fires are obviously going to take most of the MOP meeting on July, but I think that's an excellent opportunity for us to discuss amongst ourselves where we feel safe yield is. It's stated clearly in your conversation, in your document, that yes, we can impact Mill Impact Creek, and we do actually like the economic values associated with Mill Impact Creek having water in them. And that was one of the concerns in your document. And I like the idea that we could have a discussion here about safe yield too. So I would love to see that as an agenda item.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Let's add that one, and then we'll recap when Mila and I talk soon. Anyone else? Anything to add for now? Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and pause and then adjourn the meeting at 3:37. Thank you, everyone.
So thanks to staff.